cha, as Gail is saying in the chat. How are you all feeling today? Are you excited about another fun webinar for us? I'm pretty stoked about it, as you can see. And today we're going to be doing something a little different than the other webinars, because this one's going to be a teach-in. So you could think of this almost like we want to really practice what we talked about for the project incubator last week, that we want to have members of the community offer teach-ins on topics that they know about to help other members of the community to improve their projects. And that's what we were calling teach-ins. And we also want to have design sessions, which is where we have some shared struggle or some challenge that comes up for a lot of us. And we might have a facilitated dialogue about how to address it. And what's interesting is that this teach-in, in a way, is almost like a design session, because we're now going to explore the shared struggle of, how do I describe my project? How do I invite other people to get excited and passionate about what I care about? Or how do I find people who care about the same things I do so we can gather together and initiate projects and find ways to work together? There are going to be shared challenges like this that come up regularly as we're doing this work. And what we're going to explore today is how to present an idea in a concise, compelling, and hopefully emotionally engaging way. And we're going to use a really cool technique called pikakacha, which is this weird Japanese word for those of us who don't speak Japanese, probably not weird at all for them, which is pikakacha roughly translates as like the quiet murmur of a good conversation. Like if you enter a room and people are sitting at the table eating their food and you can hear them chatting, and there's this like little bit of a louder pulse, a little bit quieter, different thoughts germinating and percolating. Those little tasty morsels of conversation are what we offer in a pikakacha talk, because it's basically like haiku for PowerPoint. If you want to think back, for those of us who are old enough to remember in the late 80s and early 90s, when most of us had to sit through a lot of terrible PowerPoint presentations, it's like, oh my God, how many words can you put on one slide that no one's going to read anyway? Like, we've experienced, yeah, those of us who are old enough will remember this, right? So someone got the cool idea, probably a design thinker, was like, what if we tried to make putting together the presentation into a fun, creative activity? And then those watching the presentation might have more fun too. And this is similar to when you write a haiku. Haiku is, a poem with 3 lines with a fixed number of syllables per line. And you have to get really creative to say something profound, something funny, something clever in a really small amount of space. It's exactly the same idea for presentations. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through a round of watching a pikakacha talk, because I put one together yesterday that I'm excited to share with all of you. And then afterwards, we're going to go like in theater, you go behind the curtain and see how the production was done. I'm going to show you the process I used so that I could create this presentation quickly. Of course, it's material I'm really familiar with. I probably did it faster than most people would normally do it. I've given presentations on this topic before. But what I really want to showcase today is how you can create a compelling narrative using images and small amounts of text, and structured in a way that it's about 6 minutes long. And then anyone else could come and watch it and be engaged and say, wow, that looks like a really cool project. I'd like to get involved. And this is sort of the idea here today. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you all this talk that I put together, so we can all experience it together. And then afterwards, I'll go into a different presentation and I'll walk through how I did it. And I might want to do it the same way, or you might be like, well, that's a fun way you did it, but I have other ideas. And that's where we're going to have nice discussion in the Q&A, and then also in the community Zoom calls this week. Is how do we use tools like this to help each other to become more engaged, to become more excited, to become more motivated, and then to work together by finding common passion or common interest. All right, so we excited? You can tell I am. I also had a lot of coffee this morning, so if I talk too fast, just tag me in the chat box. Actually, Tyler's sitting here to the side laughing like he shouldn't have had that other cup of coffee. It's probably true. But anyway, let's get started, shall we? So, David, Yeah, if you feel me on coffee, it's kind of like me off coffee, actually. I'm naturally this high, and I will not be making coffee bathroom breaks. I've timed this well. All right, with that said, let's get started, shall we? So what I'm going to do, so that all of you can see what's happening here, is I'm going to start a presentation with an opening slide that is not on a timer. So this slide does not have a time restriction, and the Pekakacha presentation will begin when I advance to the next slide. So I'm sort of cheating by taking an extra moment here and bumming a little extra time, but that's just so you can prepare and say, this screen is not the Pekakacha, but the next screen is. And you're going to see that these slides are going to advance on their own. I won't be pushing any buttons. And I'm going to try to tell a story within the limited amount of time, 20 seconds per each slide, as we go through the slides. All right, so is everyone ready? Our Pekakacha today is called Entering the Dream, Ecoversities and Rivers That Live. Let's start, shall we? So the first thing I want to do is set the stage by telling you something you already know, which is that the world is pretty fucked up right now. As we can see from this planetary boundaries framework that I've talked about in a lot of other talks, the entire Earth system is being thrown into a chaotic turbulence, very far from its ability to regulate itself. And so those of us who are trying to deal with this fucked up situation are like, where do I go to learn how to fix it? Do I find my own way? Is there someone that can teach me? I mean, like, how do I even understand what this problem is, let alone do something about it? Like, how do I, as a person immersed in this very complex situation, find my way forward? Should I maybe try a university, take some college classes, get a degree and become an expert? Is that where I'm going to find the solution to this? Maybe if I got a PhD in Earth system science, I'd know what to do about that problem. Well, most of us go to universities and we quickly discover they don't actually connect us to hands-on work. So maybe, should I maybe take a permaculture course instead? Go and get my fingers dirty, practice gardening, learn how to regenerate a little piece of earth? Well, the thing about this is I could definitely do that. It's probably a good idea, but am I actually addressing these massive complex problems? No, because the problems are just too big. I'm not going to solve all of the problems in my own little garden plot. So as I look at massive desertification, the pH level of the ocean going up, and biodiversity loss, I'm like, yeah, permaculture is a good idea, but I'm not really learning enough to take a holistic approach to this web of challenges. At the same time, this is so serious and so urgent, I have to do something. You know, every little bit does count, right? If I could help just one more tree to be put into a forest, one more little place to be a little healthier, that definitely makes me feel better and does some good. But I don't really know by doing that if I'm going to be able to solve these big problems. So if I'm looking for a place to learn how to solve these big global challenges, and I look around everywhere and I have a hard time finding it, maybe the place doesn't exist. And maybe I should help create it. What if I help created the school that we would need to solve these problems? Well, it turns out those of us here at Earth Regenerators have started doing that. And when we did already run a successful crowdfunding campaign, raise some money and set up a nature reserve here at the Origen del Agua Nature Reserve in Barichara. So that's pretty cool. That means we can do more than just set up a garden in our own backyards. We can cooperate and we can start to do bigger things. And as we explore this and feel empowered, we begin to think bigger, like maybe we shouldn't just do one project, but create a community of practice in regenerative finance. You know, like we're doing in this learning journey, so that we can all help each other launch multiple projects and help them to improve and get better over time. Well, see, if we've been practicing this in a little way, maybe we should try something bigger. So we've talked about this before, that we want to buy a very special piece of land called Las Albercas, which is very uniquely located in a landscape as a place for education and for connecting different projects that already exist. So here we're thinking at the territorial scale. This is a place that really needs help too, because there used to be a river that went along it, and that river died back in the 1970s, about 45 years ago, coincidentally about the time that I was born. So I was born into the world as a river was dying. Could I maybe do something to learn how to bring rivers back to life? The thing is, this is going to be really challenging because we have to do some really difficult things and we might fail. Like, what if we can't negotiate with the greedy land speculators who control access to this land right now? What if they try to charge so much money that there's no way for us to realistically or fairly build a project here? And how would we raise that money in the first place? It's like, yeah, I'm sitting here looking at my pockets. They're feeling pretty empty. I don't think I have enough to do something this big on my own. Is there some way we can create value and pull it together between all of us? That's a really important question that we might want to think a little about. And as we recall for this learning journey, it's all about doing this work for real, getting our hands dirty, fingers in the mud. We don't want to just imagine big, ambitious projects. We want to manifest them. We want to make them real. So this isn't just about how do we do it, it's do I even believe we can do it in the first place? So we have to practice dreaming big like the whole planet, like this blue marble, this whole thing. What if we created a design school for regenerating the entire planet? And we learned how to develop and evolve entire bioregions to become regenerative economies. See, this isn't just about little pieces of land. This is about finding the pieces of land that are strategically located for creating a design school that can regenerate the earth. And I believe this piece of land is one of those pieces of land, that we would not only have a nice reforestation project here, this could be an anchor for connecting us to the school we've been looking for. And as my daughter can tell you, when she sat and prayed to this river to bring it back to life, and it started to rain hard and puddles formed, and she could feel with her body the land becoming a little healthier, that this is something we can actually do. And there are other places that have already done it. So the question is the medicine we've been waiting for us? And I learned this great story in Medellin, Colombia, which was where the worst violence was during the time of conflict in this country, that they figured out how to transform things by empowering everyone in the community to become an agent of transformation. So it can be done, but we have to keep in mind this is not going to be easy. The world is still a fucked up place. Do you guys remember when Australia was on fire before the pandemic? An entire continent burning down? And we don't even remember now because we're in another crisis. And there are going to be new crises after this. So there's no time to waste getting on a different course. So the invitation I have for all of you is to roll up our sleeves, to learn how to work together, and place in the ground the first design school for regenerating the entire planet, embedded within a bioregion where we can work at the territorial scale. Are you ready? Let's get to work. So there you go. 6 minutes long, a Pekakacha talk with 20 slides. You see, we covered a lot of ground there, didn't we? And it kept me rolling on my toes, which is a very important part of this. Well, now what I want to do is pull back the veil. Yeah, I actually have a background in theater and in dance, and I know that the things behind the curtain don't look like they do in front of the curtain. So what I want to do right now is share with you how I engaged in strategic framing when I put this talk together, and I want to show you the design process I went through to make it. All right, is everyone ready? Here we go. First thing is, there's a very simple structure. The Pekakacha is 20 images, each one of them 20 seconds long. So as you saw as I was presenting, the reason I was like running to keep up was I knew I only had 20 seconds until the next slide came. So I had to be ready to have each image in a sequence, so I basically knew how the story hangs together, and I could pull myself through it. So let's look at how I did this. Basically, there were 5 steps. The first thing I did is I created a title. What is this talk going to be about? How do I want to structure and frame this narrative? And you remember I called it Entering the Dream, Ecoversities and Rivers That Live. It's just funny because I actually didn't name the word ecoversity in the presentation. Then what I did that was really fun for me was I wrote like writing haiku. I wrote 1 line of text on each slide. I wrote a slide that said the world is fucked up, a slide that says where do I go to learn how to fix it, and I did this continuing for 20 slides. Now, there's a little secret that I'm going to get to in a moment, which is that I was able to write these 20 lines of text and have them be coherent and somewhat powerful as a story because I used a proven narrative structure, a type of story that's so prevalent in different cultures that we know that it works. And there's a lot of research showing how it works. And if we understand that narrative structure, we can piece together these 20 lines of text to follow the logic of that story, and it'll pull people in. After that, all I did was add images to each slide that would reinforce the point I was wanting to make. And believe it or not, this whole process only took me about 25 minutes. It's like 5 minutes to write the 20 lines of text and 15 or 20 minutes looking for images to go with each of those. So each slide would have an image. And because I've given a lot of talks about this sort of thing in the past, it wasn't that hard for me to do, and I did it quickly. So it's sort of like, a poetry jam. Like, I'm just going to quickly throw this together and see what I can do. And this is how I did it. See, it was like this. I took the text for each slide, and then I added the images. And I decided, just so that this would really be visually coherent for all of you, I actually left the text on the slide. Just, I was giving this Pakaka-cha talk without wanting to be in teaching mode later. I might have taken that text away or had it hidden as notes so you couldn't see it. But I just wanted you to all see how simple this two-step process was. Once I knew that I wanted to show how the world is fucked up, I was like, do I have a picture that shows that? Well, yeah, I've used planetary boundaries before. If I want to ask, where do I go to learn how to fix it? I was always a fan of Robert Frost and his poem about two roads diverging in a wood. So I just went and did a Google search for two roads diverging in the woods and found this picture. See how easy that was? And as I did that for each slide, the presentation just fell into place really quickly. But there was a sort of a magic sauce that made it so easy to do. And that is probably the most important question for any talk you would ever give. Just, where does the narrative come from? Where does the story come from? How do we know how to tell a good story? Luckily, there's this guy named Joseph Campbell. Some of you might have heard of him. He traveled all over the world studying the mythology of different cultures, and he found that there was an archetypal structure, basically a logic and a temporal sequence for events and processes that was universal across different cultural myths. And he wrote a famous book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, because there were thousands of mythologies and each of them had the same structure to it. And what's interesting is we know this type of story works because it's widely used in popular books and movies. So if you have ever watched a movie like Star Wars or Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings, Avatar, or any other really successful movie, or read books that were really powerful stories, they probably followed the sequence of the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is a way of describing transformation that happens in a community. So this is why it's something that can relate to the human condition and can map from one specific story to another. Like, how is the story of Bilbo Baggins or the story of Frodo Baggins related to the story of Luke Skywalker? Well, it turns out they start in this ordinary world and they're called to an adventure. And at first, they don't take the call. They don't want to go. But then they meet a mentor who helps them make the transition. And they become empowered and they cross a threshold. When they cross this threshold, they go from the ordinary world to a magical world, a place where dreams become real, a place where what they're exploring is the inner geography of meaning and purpose for them as a human being, as part of their community. And this is where the universal pattern of transformation occurs, is that there's some status quo, which is the starting point. And the call to adventure is that the status quo's got problems with it. And people can't solve it with ordinary means. So they need a kind of supernatural aid. They need something that is more than what they can find in their community to solve it. And they need some help finding their way into this thing that they didn't know how to find. So they cross a threshold into a different world, which could literally be going into a different world. Like, it could be going from a living world to the world of the dead or some other metaphorical transition. Or it could just be a metaphorical shift, meaning that they go deep in themselves and struggle with parts of their weaknesses and their insecurities. They enter into a road of trials and struggles where they learn how to approach the ordeal that they're going to face. And by doing this, they receive some kind of a reward, some special talisman, some magical object, something that allows them to tackle the problem. And then they begin facing and confronting and resolving the problem to be able to return back to the ordinary world and serve their community to make the world a better place. And in this way, they've transformed the world. Now, what's interesting about this universal narrative is that there's a woman named Nancy Duarte who has actually figured out how to map this to giving a presentation. And a lot of the most successful TED Talks use this template as the structure for how to tell their story. So you see each of these versions is slightly different, but you can see that they follow the same archetypal pattern. And so what I did to create my presentation, my Pakakacha talk, was I used these 12 steps from this diagram, and I just started adding slides until I got to 20. So I was like, there's limited awareness of a problem. Well, let's name that the planetary boundaries have been crossed. Let's increase the awareness of it by inviting people into an adventure. And then we're going to describe some of the challenges, how the problems are too big, and we don't really know how to get there. We don't know what kind of education we're seeking. So we really are reluctant or hesitant to change. But as we realize we must do something, we rise over overcoming that reluctance and commit ourselves to making a change. And see here in step 6, it says experimenting with the first change, and step 7 is preparing for a big change. That's where I showed the slide that we successfully raised money for a nature reserve. We did something small but meaningful, experimenting with a meaningful challenge, but we wanted to face a challenge something bigger. So then we get to step 8. Let's attempt a bigger change. Let's try to acquire a piece of land that's much more complex and establish a design school there. And then we need to find some way to dedicate ourselves to that path and make the attempt, and then master our effort to solve the problem until we can solve it. And I use this as the narrative template for how I put together my Pakakacha talk. So when you look at the slides with this narrative structure in mind, you can see that we go from entering the dream into the status quo world that is a messed up place. And then we are sort of reluctant to engage because we don't really know what to do. We tentatively try a few things, but they don't really seem to be enough until we get to the point where we might say, I could give up and I could stop, or I could cross the threshold and do something and realize that I'm an empowered agent of change and that I can help create the better world that needs to be created. And then I can start to experiment with solutions. So you see how the narrative flow of my slides is following the narrative flow of the hero's journey. That was something I did intentionally, and that made it a lot easier to put the story together. But here's the key question. Who is the hero of the Pakakacha talk? Is it me, Joe, your presenter? No, I did a little clever play here. The hero is you. As you were watching me give this presentation, I placed you in the role of the hero. As you were observing and reflecting on the problem and considering whether or not to try one route or another, I was inviting you into a role-playing game so that as you followed along with the hero's journey, if you stay emotionally engaged, you start to feel inspired and somehow empowered by the end of the presentation. And that's because you're the one who's on the journey, which interestingly is how it works with the protagonist in a movie. As you're watching Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars trilogy, you actually are becoming empowered along with him by relating to his struggles, because he's the most human character, the one who has the most vulnerable traits, the one who you see things more from his perspective. And by taking on that perspective as the audience member of the movie, you get to experience being Luke Skywalker. Well, this is what I did today by structuring the hero's journey around acquiring a piece of land to create a design school for Earth regeneration. As I structured it so that as you were watching the presentation, you were in the passive role of going along on a story. And this invites you to go into an active role of joining my project and helping to make it a success. And that was a little clever trick I used in the way I structured the questions and the images to draw you in emotionally into an emotional journey of transformation that by the end of the presentation, if I've done my job right, you have been changed and now you are an activated agent of regeneration. I don't know if it worked, but that was the attempt. So the key lesson here, which we can draw from another famous book, which is an interview that Bill Moyers conducted with Joseph Campbell called The Power of Myth, is the power of myth is to live a dream until it becomes real. While we're in this imagined world of possibility and we ask ourselves, should we try to do this? Could I do something bigger? Did I experiment and learn things with a small project? Does this mean my dream is viable? Could I actually change the world? This is a mythical space where we're dreaming about a future while acting in the present. And if we do this effectively and we learn along the way, the future embodies the dream and the dream becomes real. And this is how we change the world, with intention. This is intentional cultural evolution. So that was it. Any questions, comments? I'm very curious to have this conversation with all of you about how we apply this way of creating a presentation, this way of telling a story, and this way of designing the structure of our conversation so that we invite people in and become empowered agents of change simply by watching someone else's talk. So, see, the whole goal behind this was I wanted to give you an experience and then unpack how I made the experience and then show you some of the design thinking that was behind it. And the idea is you'll be able to come back and watch this webinar later and be like, huh, I could totally do that. I could follow that logic of 12 steps and create 20 slides. And so one thing we want to invite for people who are going to join the Regenerative Project Incubator is to create Pakakacha talks and record them to share about their own projects or about the passion you have for a shared struggle that could attract people who come together and create a project. And in this way, we are incubating the capacities to dream and to manifest our dreams. So I would really love to hear reactions to all of this. What kinds of questions do you have? What kinds of insights does it give you? What kinds of emotional, like I'm curious, maybe in the chat box. So those of you who have questions, start to write them in. But just everyone in the chat box, how did it feel to participate in the Pakakacha? Like, how did it feel as I was presenting? Can you maybe just like a word or a phrase in the chat box? So I'd love to hear that. And then I'd also love to hear, how did it feel to see the design process? Did it feel like something you could do? Did it feel like Joe's just so damn smart and good at this, I could never do that? Or are you like, oh, there's a method to that, you know? I could do that too. See, I think this is really the key here, is that what we want to really do is help each other to do all of this better. And so I hope today I've role modeled a process that really shows we can do this. Okay, there's some questions coming in, so maybe I'll just jump on one of them really quickly. So I'll start with David. So David, I'll invite you onto the screen. And David is saying, what do you think about the idea of creating a Pakakacha talk as a direct fundraising appeal? Actually, I love that you asked that question, David, because I was like, huh, maybe this Pakakacha talk is my fundraising appeal. What do you think? Like, what's bubbling up for you?
Wow. Yeah. Really good presentation, by the way. Is like, I think just like the fact that you have all that whole journey kind of outlined already really helps, because it's like, I think like how easy it is to make these things is really how well we've thought out like the whole journey and where it leads and everything, even when we don't know. So I think it's an invitation to, ask ourselves that question of how much do we have our vision figured out in different ways, and like with all the collaboration. What's bubbling up for me personally is, I'm part of this core circle of a group out here in California and Miwok land, where they're negotiating the purchase of a land, and we basically have to come up with 120,000 in 2 months. So it's like we're figuring out how to raise money right now. So yeah, I know it's really exciting, and also like, it's terrifying, but it's great. And I was just thinking about like, we need to be able to tell the story. It all comes down to the story that we're telling, why we're doing it, why people should give their money, very similar to what you're doing. So, I want to have these examples, or these exercises be as readily available for this project as possible. So I'm thinking about, maybe this kind of format would be good to be able to tell our story and, get fundraisers really quickly, because we need to.
Yeah, I was thinking of two things. Like, the reason I put the presentation together so quickly, there are 3 parts. One part is I have a lot of experience gathering these images, and I knew a lot of the images I wanted to use. So it wasn't hard to find them. But that was like secondary. The 2 real reasons I was able to do this quickly were that the constraint of the Pekka said 20 slides, 20 seconds. So once I know that I'm limited to that, I have to find a way to make the story fit. And the second was there are 12 steps to the hero's journey. So I couldn't have more than 3 or maybe 4 slides be any part of the journey, or else I wouldn't get done. And those constraints were so powerful that I was forced to tell my story very concisely. And so design constraint was the key here for this. Mm-hmm. And I want to just empower you to create a Pekka talk for this fundraising, share it with the group, and invite everyone here to help David's project be a success. Because that would just be a beautiful way for us to demonstrate this. So I just love that you have such a beautiful parallel project to what I need to do, that we could try to run them both at the same time, and like in different communities, and just learn from each other directly. It would be freaking amazing.
Totally.
So, hell yeah.
Yeah, that's why I'm here. And I second that. The constraints are, I'm like an artist and everything. I think super creatively, but like the constraints are awesome for creative flow and just like something to scaffold on. So that's great.
Sweet. I'm looking forward to your Pekka, man. Bring it on.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, David. Let's rock and roll. Wow. Yeah, it's exciting. So parallel to us. So let's see here. I've got one here from Julian. So Julian, I'll invite you on the screen. And Julian's saying, can Campbell's Hero's Journey be applied to the design of curriculum and pedagogy itself, whether at a graduate level or early to mid-childhood education? Ooh, I like this question. Julian, I hope the tech lets you on the screen, because the answer is a resounding yes. We can do it for any transformative process, but I'm very curious what you're thinking, and especially what you're thinking about the curriculum for the design pathway for regenerating Earth, but just like in general, what are you thinking here?
Hey, Joe, nice to see you. Hopefully you can hear me.
Hey, Julian, great to see you too. Yeah.
So, I guess I was just been thinking hard about how one would design a comprehensive, lifelong curriculum from early childhood all the way through adolescence and beyond, quite frankly. And if there is a good model to follow, obviously there are lots of different things that are out there, but just listening to you talk about the hero's journey makes me think that, hey, if this is something that is tried and tested, not just in our cultures, but across cultures, there's got to be some inherent wisdom to it that, should cause us to think, hey, how could we adapt this to an educational experience, particularly insofar as to the extent that one believes that an educational experience or a journey is one about discovering, understanding oneself and making meaning in the world. And that sounds exactly like what, the hero's journey is all about. And then, then taking those understandings and bringing action and doing something with it, right? So that seems instructive. So I'm wondering about that. And then I guess at the same token, I was wondering, I've also been thinking that, there's also some discussion about, the idea of an individual hero coming to save the day may not may not be a very helpful way to think about things. Just the way we're trained to think about superheroes and coming to save the world as an individual. That seems to be something that's conflicting a little bit. Maybe there's a way to reconcile that, right? Because we need collective action, and we need to be collectively empowered and not just rely on a savior type person. But is there a way to marry that, and is there a way to sort of bake this all into curriculum and education? So that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I'm going to start with your second point, because I have a dear friend who you might know because she lives in San Francisco. Do you know Maya Zuckerman?
I know of her. Yeah.
Yeah, she helped set up. She helped set up Transmedia San Francisco like 5 years ago or something. And I'm sure you have overlapping contacts. There was a time in, I think it was 2017 or 2016, I don't remember exactly, when she was translating the hero's journey into the collective journey, where the entire community does it. And we were brainstorming together around how to frame it. And she had a lot of good insights. And it actually does map really well. So for anyone who's interested, just look up Collective Journey and Maya Zuckerman. And I know she wrote about a lot of it on Medium, like medium.com. So my experience working with her is to say it absolutely can work with the community as the hero. And for your first question, I wanted to invite all of us to reflect on this learning journey, which we're now like 7 weeks into, and ask ourselves, to what extent is this learning journey in regenerative finance structured like the hero's journey? In what way did each of us show up with some sort of mundane sense of the problems, and then we gradually begin to see from a different light, and we seek different tools that our community didn't know about? So for example, a lot of regenerative finance didn't know to go to pro-social, and pro-social is a tool that changes how we do finance, and so on. And what we're building, especially now that we're creating this project incubator, is we're cultivating regenerative leaders, which is the same thing as heroes in the hero's journey. And so each of you who's participating in this learning journey, if we're doing it well, are becoming like empowered heroes. And so I feel like this way of designing pedagogy is quite potent. Like if you had a group of 6th graders and you're teaching them like biology by going into a city park, if you structured the activity as a hero's journey, you would give them a problem, you would be a mentor to them, you would allow them to reject the problem, and you would help them to have transformational experiences, maybe seeking nature connection, finding other people in the community, researching on their own, self-directed learning, and the structure would be like the hero's journey. So I think that there's a lot of power in thinking about pedagogy and curriculum in this way. Is as long as we don't overuse the tool and think it's the only tool, but we start to incorporate other pedagogical tools as well. But my sense is that it could be quite powerful, especially for things like, think of like Survival Quest for nature education, where emotionally troubled teenagers go out into the forest and learn how to do survival skills, like making their own tools, making their own eating utensils from tree bark, and that they're actually structured like learning journeys that are the hero's journey. So I think you're really onto something here. I think this could be a very powerful tool for education in general. And I'm just curious what you think about that.
Yeah, no, thanks for reinforcing that. I mean, this is a new insight for me. I'm part of my learning in hero's journey too. So it's a spark that I think I like to keep probing and provoking. And I guess one last question for you is there something to that initial stage of, the hero initially rejecting the call and then subsequently coming around because, he or she has met a mentor or has gained a new insight? Seems like that there might be something there to it, although, you didn't really expand on it in your talk, but I wonder what you thought about that step, that initial step.
Yeah, the thing I think is really important here is there needs to be real agency. Whereas Daniel Schmattenberger and Jordan Greenhall would say there has to be sovereignty, which means the person who's becoming the hero has to actively choose it. They have to intend to. They don't just do it because they're told. They don't just do it by habit. They don't just do it because it's what their society tells them to do. They're actually going against the cultural script. They're breaking from the normal world. And that has a lot of social risk. So it is necessary for that step that the person who becomes the hero chooses it. And this is really key. No one can make you be a hero. No one can do that. But you become the hero by saying, I can't just sit by anymore. You know, my culture doesn't tell me what to do about this and no one's really helping me, but I just realized that I have to do something. I have to be an empowered agent, even if we don't use those words. And so what I think is really key is the ownership of agency, to say, well, I'm going to do this. And I'll give an example with the origin of Waterland. There was a moment when I touched the ground when I was there that first day, and I said, this land is actually asking me if I would heal, like this land needs to be healed. Am I going to be the person who heals it? Like, who the hell am I to buy land? Who am I to raise money? Who am I to regenerate this? And there was this questioning. And then as the feeling stayed with me over the following weeks, and as people came together and offered to give me money to buy the land before I was even asking for it, I was like, 24 hours later, I had $10,000 gifted to me by people on Facebook. It's like, oh, these people are telling me it's me. So am I going to accept this or not? And there came a point when I had to commit myself. It's like, if I'm doing this, I've got to do it. I'm responsible if I accept this money from these people. And I've been following it through ever since. And it had to be my decision. So I think that moment when you own the decision is when you enter the hero's journey as the hero. That's when you're the protagonist of the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Julian. Great to see you. I'm going to jump off to the next question now. But yeah, great stuff. So the next one we have here is from Rafaela. Hello, Rafaela, how are you? Hope you're there. And you're saying, I found the exploration of alternatives, university, permaculture design course, very powerful, maybe because it was my own path. But I have a doubt about the end, like how do you provide a structured solution so that it's convincing, but at the same time an open solution? This is a really good topic for us to explore, which is that the solution doesn't exist until the journey is lived. And so there's no compelling solution until it's been manifested, which is why only some people are going to engage in this transformational journey. And I'm really curious for your journey, how do you relate to that? Not just in my presentation, but like, how do you relate to that in general? I guess it's you've touched on something powerful. Yeah.
I'm struggling. And it's really a leap of faith, no? Every time I'm like, I think Joe knows where we are going, or maybe not. I'm not sure. But what's the next step? Always, which is the exciting part as well, because otherwise it would be super boring to, I don't know, not motivating. I don't have an answer. I have a question.
Well, one thought I have about this that is inspired by watching a talk by Nate Higgins yesterday. And he was describing the difference between proximate causes and ultimate causes of human behavior. And specifically, he's talking about rampant consumerism. And he was like, the proximate cause, the one we think is the cause, is like, oh, I really like that chocolate cake, so I'm going to get the cake. Or I really want to have that prestigious car, or whatever it is. But the ultimate cause, the biologically real cause, is that there are neurotransmitters in my brain that are being released in pursuit of the goal, and that's what's driving my behavior. Because I'm a biological organism who must pursue goals in order to survive. And what's interesting is there are psychologists who have studied this, and they found that all of the joy is in the hunt. It's in the search. It's in the attempt to get something. It's not in the having it. You're not happy when you have the car. You're happy when you're trying to get the car. And it's because biophysically, your body is activated in seeking something that is not complete. And once you're satiated, like once you've eaten a bunch of chocolate cake, you're just sitting there rubbing your belly and feeling kind of gross, right? But like, I ate too much chocolate cake. But when you're looking at that chocolate cake and going, ooh, I can't wait for that first bite, that's the time when you're pulled in. And I think part of the answer to this question is the seeking part, the real meaning we find in seeking. And that if we do this right, we'll just like keep going on hero's journeys. Like we'll just find new ways to have meaningful actions in our lives, because we'll sort of, I don't know about get addicted. Some of us might get addicted, but we'll like runner's high. You know, when you start running, it doesn't feel very good, but after a while, you feel lousy if you're not running because your body craves it. And we start craving the engagement of a meaningful story, which makes me think of Jane McGonigal. Do you know who Jane McGonigal is? Oh my God, she wrote this great book called Reality is Broken. And she did her PhD in performance studies at University of California, Berkeley, studying cognitive neuroscience and video games. And she found that there's a thing called peak performance, which is when you're challenged to the maximal extent, just beyond your abilities, but you don't fail. And the best games are designed to hold you in that peak performance place. And that's why people are addicted to video games, because they optimize for release of those neurotransmitters.
Mm.
And so there's something about that, I think, that's like knowing the answer.
Yeah.
Believe, like already knowing we can do it isn't as exciting as knowing we might fail if it's structured right. So there's something. I don't know if these are answers, but these are like ramblings that are vaguely relevant.
No, yeah. Good enough for now.
Yeah, for now. Well, we're on this journey, so we'll find out.
Indeed.
Um,
Thank you. It was
yeah.
really nice. And in any case, I appreciate
Thank you.
very much this exploration of alternatives at the beginning, because it really helped. I mean, I don't know if all of us had the same journey, but that was exactly my journey. So I was like, yes, I tried that. And I was feeling this. So I was super into that. No, that was nice, powerful.
Yeah, well, it was like your story and my story blended. And then we both could be heroes in the same journey, because we could both try to achieve this shared journey, which is related to Julian's question, is how do we go from the trap or the limitation of our own personal journey, which is limited. And so we need to find a way to be on the journey together.
Yes.
And for that, I look forward to when you can get to Colombia and we can hang out and try and do some of this together.
That would be fantastic.
Let me know when we can do that.
When you're done with the revolution and with COVID, maybe I'll be able.
I think that comes back in cycles. It'll stick around for a while. This is Colombia. But yeah, thank you, Rafa. Great to see you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay, let's see what there's another question here by Anita. And she's asking, I'll invite you on the screen, Anita. How do we adapt this for collective and collaborative efforts? Perhaps there may be one person helping the first, others to join, but then what differences are there in the story? I think this is a really good question about adapting the story to those who join. And, hey, Anita, how are you? Can you hear me okay? We're getting a little bit of an audio reverberation. So I don't know if we're going to have some problems here. And now you've muted yourself, which means you can't speak. Maybe, do you want to unmute yourself and share a little of what you were thinking?
Okay, I was just... that was...
The reverberation's really bad, unfortunately. Yeah. I can try muting and see.
Okay, so you're muted. No, it's still doing it. I can't hear you now.
If you try turning down your speaker while you speak, and then turn it back up afterwards, so you can hear that. That might do it.
So how is this? Is this better?
Yes, it's working.
Okay. So I'll see. This is going to be tricky because then I have to hear you. Yeah, so this seems to be, in the same line. Now, I want to say that sometimes when we're talking to each other, we just talk about what Joe is doing. And so there's this huge, I know from some things you've presented that there's more of a group there, but the way that we're communicating through this channel makes it seem as if it is Joe's journey and only Joe's journey. And I'm really concerned about how any of us who want to can put together journeys that are not just someone in charge and someone's vision, but actually from the beginning is much more collaborative.
Mm. Yeah, can you hear me again? Did you turn up your speaker? Yeah. The reverb is still happening though. Okay, there it's gone. Yeah, I think part of this is about how we create an ecosystem of projects. There was a nice example with David Abramson, where he has a project that he wants to do and that he can seek support in this community to learn how to do it. And as we have more people that are coming forth with their projects, we'll just have more variety. And that's one thing that's going to help. And I think another thing that will help is for us to go from the project side and more to the shared struggles and the shared social supports side, which we talked about as other parts of this process, that where new projects emerge among people in a conversation. I think both of those are really good places to cultivate this diversity. And if there's a variety of projects that are led by someone and a variety of projects that emerge in a collaborative dialogue, that across those, I think, will hold the capacities that you're describing. And the question is really going to be about how many of us, the diversity of us that are participating in this, how we hold the space for that to emerge without just jumping to the projects that are led by people that are more of like familiar top-down leadership models, because that's what more people have experience with. And so in a way, it's like holding the space for those two aspects, those two developmental processes. And then we also have the reminders, like, yeah, we should be doing more of this other one to balance it out and try to find our way as we navigate and as we do. I'm not sure what you think of that.
So one thing that I really like about what you're saying, Joe, is reminding ourselves about the projects or the people who want to be in these collaborative situations and presentations. So I'm having a really hard time with this in my ears. Sorry about the barriers here. So I would, does that come from you? Where does it come from? The remembering that we want to do more than just the single person in charge kind of thing.
I think the place that comes from is by having small group dialogues. Like when we started having the campfire talks on Earth Regenerators a couple months ago, and when the book club started last year, I forget if it was like September, August when it started, there was a small group that gathered and embarked on a learning journey together. Mm-hmm. And the dialogue was very collaborative. I think the key here is to see that projects might appear like these objects, like there's this project and there's this project and there's this project, which sort of puts the project in front and puts the people in the back. And if we can go in the other direction and say, there are these social dynamics of interaction and projects come and go, then that'll help us to remember this. And so part of it, I think, is to have a flow of activities that aren't specifically about projects, but that we understand that as a project emerges, there are places to get support for the projects. And that background, foreground reversal can really help us to keep this in our awareness. And one simple way of doing that is just by having these small group dialogues about whatever people care to talk about that's related to Earth regeneration, which is a huge number of things. And I think it's something like that. I don't know if it's exactly that, but it's something like that. And I'm curious what you think of that.
So one thing about the small group dialogues is that I think that they need to be continuing over some time to function in this way. And they can't just be, well, I happen to have this group of people today and we'll just talk about some stuff. So, you know, how do we go ahead and start getting into that?
Yeah, this is where, like, having this learning journey for 2 months and structured every week, there's the same time we meet for the community Zoom calls. Some facilitated structure for a defined period of time really helps. And this can be around a project, like we had the Body Char Regeneration Fund. It was a project. Or we can have a learning journey like this one. Or we can have a book club where the duration is the number of book chapters or something like that. And I think having hosts or facilitators and having a structured way of interaction, a structured way of interacting and an agreed period of time really helps. And then people can continue or not, or start other. If they're well structured for like 2 months or 3 months, people build good relationships and things can continue. And I think for us, we need to be designing this part, like paying attention to it as we go and give it the attention that it needs.
So if I were to do that on where I am and where I see in this place in the Appalachian Mountains, you know, I'm trying to think about what needs to happen in the structure so that there's another facilitator, so that I'm in a different role, you know, and I become the one who fills in initial information and asks answers historical questions and so on. But there needs to be a slightly different structure for that and somebody else facilitating.
Yeah, one archetype that might be relevant here is just the archetype of the mentor, because it sounds like you would be playing a mentor role. Mm-hmm. Other roles too, of course, but that might be a primary role. And in that case, we can actively cultivate as part of the awareness and this idea of an incubator where we help each other develop diversity of projects can include that we identify archetypal roles, mentors being a very important role, different projects needing different kinds of mentors, different people needing different kinds of mentors. And I think that's going to be an ongoing need, meaning that's a role that will be valued for this community of activities. And we should look for other roles: teacher, advisor, designer, collaborator, partner, shoulder to cry on, and other more specifics like stereotyped roles for specific moments. And for us to just have an understanding that that there are specific roles that we can play and then actually offer them. Say, I can be a mentor in this project, or this is a project where I'm currently leading it, but I'd really like to become a mentor and I'm recruiting a leader, so that there's clarity about the roles. I think that kind of clarity is really going to be helpful as part of the evolution of the projects. So yeah, this is great.
So in terms of self-presentation also, I actually have, professional experience teaching. And in the teaching that I did as a graduate student with master's level students in my group, then it was heavily a mentoring role. And so these are things I actually have skill sets, to offer. And, not sure entirely what the way is to do that in this setting. You might have suggestions.
Well, there's one idea that came up last week for the community Zoom calls and that our host team has been talking about, is to invite people to share the projects they're working on in the Zoom calls this week, so that other people who don't have projects that are ready to present are able to play roles in the advisory circles. So we're basically practicing advisory circles by having those who want to it's almost like I bring the content, but the process is advising. So we're practicing the advising circles where everyone plays the role of mentor in that. There's a person presenting the project and everyone else is playing a mentoring role or an advising role. I think we can practice doing some of that as just one thing that will probably happen this week. But that in general, we want to have a way of identifying who are the people who are in a position to be mentors so that if someone's looking for them. Like I'm curious, David, who's just came on the screen a few minutes ago, has a project that's ready for action. Is David looking for mentorship? Is David paying attention like, oh, I should talk to Anita, she might be helpful. Like I think this sort of proactive way of recognizing that we're here to help each other and then coming to each other for help is part of the pro-social support. That's just, if we've done a good job, it's there. And if we haven't, we need to cultivate it. And if we neglect it, we need to give it more attention. So yeah, this is great stuff. So thank you so much for bringing these questions up and for offering this perspective. I think it's very valuable. So thank you very much, Anita. Is this helpful for you too?
Yes, it's very helpful. It's very helpful to feel that I'm having a voice and being able to share this with you and with everybody listening. And I certainly want to be available in that way.
It's very much
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just noticing that we're at the hour mark, which means it might be a good time for us to wrap up, because I like to honor people's time. Thanks so much, Anita, for this. Very, very helpful. Your questions are very helpful. And your thoughts and observations are also very helpful. What I want to invite for in closing today's session is come back and rewatch the part of this where I gave the pakakacha or where I went behind the curtain, if that's helpful. Yeah, and also create your own. Try to follow the process I did or modify it to serve your own creative process, and share your pakakacha presentations with the rest of the group. You can do that in two ways. One is you could record it and post it on YouTube or Vimeo or something like that and share the video link. And the other is you could host a Zoom call and invite people to watch your pakakacha and give you feedback. And so what I want to invite is anyone who is inspired to practice, find some buddies in this cohort of people in the learning journey and practice together. And we are here to help. Your host team is here to help. I'm here to help. And I'm really excited to see everyone giving these talks and sharing their ideas and connecting with each other. So with that said, thank you all so much for participating today. You can tell I had fun. I hope you guys had fun too. And onward we go. So let's keep rolling with all of this. Thank you all for participating, and I'll see you soon.